16 F-35s crossed the Zagros Mountains at 38,000 feet, and nobody on the ground was supposed to know they were there. 9 days of systematically dismantling Iran's air defense network had seen to that. Radar stations gone, command nodes reduced to rubble, 30 petroleum targets waiting in the dark below. And by every measure that existed on paper, this was a cleanup mission. But the S-300 crew sitting cold in the mountains hadn't read the paper, because 3 weeks earlier, Israeli intelligence had confirmed the destruction of that battery based on a decoy, correct launcher silhouette, plausible thermal signature, enough debris to check the box and move on. While the real system was driven 50 kilometers into the mountains, powered down and told to wait, and now 16 aircraft loaded in what Israel calls beast mode, maximum ordnance, external pylons, zero stealth. Each bomb rack multiplying their radar return like a neon sign had just entered its engagement envelope. The bet being there was nothing left alive to detect them. A bet the S-300 crew was now calling, giving themselves 90 seconds to acquire, track, and fire before the formation cleared range. But the moment their radar transmitted an EA-18G Growler orbiting western Iran, triangulated the source, pushed coordinates to a second Growler 60 miles south, and an AGM-88 Harm came off the rail accelerating past Mach 2, while inside Ruby Lead's cockpit, a threat diamond pulsed on the display, and the math was brutal. 70 seconds for the missile to arrive, 40 seconds for a competent crew to transition to fire control, meaning if that antenna switched to continuous track before impact, the next symbol on that scope would be a SAM with Ruby Flight's name on it. 60 seconds and the S-300's pulse rate increased. 50 and the beam narrowed. 40 and it was still searching, still not locked, and the Harm hit the antenna array at Mach 2.1 and lit the mountain ridge like a second sunrise. The crew never getting the shot. But as that flash faded, the question it left behind was worse than any missile. Because if one S-300 had survived 9 days of coalition strikes by simply sitting cold in the mountains, the only real question was how many more were waiting, and there was no time to answer it because Ruby Flight still had 1,800 kilometers of Iranian airspace ahead and a fuel problem that had just gotten significantly worse. Every second of that evasion burning from reserves that technically didn't exist. No KC-135 tankers tonight because those orbits had become predictable, with Iranian intelligence using tanker repositioning as a warning system for incoming strikes. Tonight's independence purchased through external drop tanks at the cost of zero margin, like crossing a desert with exactly enough fuel to reach the other side, except every evasive maneuver was a detour nobody had budgeted for, and they hadn't even reached Tehran yet when 12 kilometers from Chevron, 260 million liters of fuel sitting in 11 storage tanks on the city's northwestern edge. Ruby Lead got the second threat diamond of the night, not from behind, but from inside the depot perimeter. A Pantsir S-1, Russian-built, radar-directed 20-kilometer missile envelope, and inside 4 kilometers, twin 30-millimeter autocannons firing 5,000 rounds per minute, parked between the storage tanks for days, invisible to satellite imagery, shielded by the geometry of the tank farm itself. The escort aircraft that would normally handle exactly this pop-up contact still 50 kilometers behind, transitioning from the S-300 engagement, leaving Ruby Lead with his jamming system and a hard brake and nothing else. Pressing in at 16,000 feet in a predictable dive, while the Pantsir's tracking radar burned through his jamming at 14 kilometers, passing through the autocannon's 4-kilometer engagement window for roughly 8 seconds while holding the aircraft stable enough to release, because an unstable release meant a missed bomb, and a missed bomb meant coming back, and coming back meant fuel he didn't have. The Spice 1000 releasing off the wing pylon, with folding wings extending, no rocket motor, no thermal signature, gliding toward a target its guidance computer had memorized before takeoff. Its electro-optical seeker in the terminal phase, photographing the ground and comparing what it saw pixel by pixel against a three-dimensional reference image loaded by imagery analysts. Facial recognition for buildings, circular error 3 meters, and then Ruby Lead broke hard right. Flares punching out in pairs, the Pantsir's missile tone screaming in his helmet as a round came off the rail, his jamming system flooding the seeker with noise for 3 seconds of silence that felt longer than the entire mission before the tone warbled and the missile's track bent away and corkscrewed into the dark. And Tank 2 went first, 30 million liters atomizing into vapor and igniting before the fragments finished traveling, the fireball climbing 300 meters in 2 seconds. But then the depot's own destruction became a weapon against the mission because the smoke column punched through 5,000 feet and expanded east across the Tehran basin directly into the approach corridors of every remaining aircraft in the package, their own success drifting across the target area at the worst possible moment. And while Sapphire Flight repositioned south to find a gap in the haze, a mobile GPS jammer activated somewhere in the basin, truck-mounted, domestically built, moving every few hours. The Israelis hadn't found it. And now noise flooded the L1 and L2 frequencies every JDAM in the package depended on, while smoke had simultaneously degraded the electro-optical backup. Both guidance systems compromised at once by two threats that had no idea the other existed, meaning a 2,000-pound bomb could report nominal guidance all the way down while tracking a phantom coordinate 200 meters from the intended aim point, heading for whatever happened to sit there. Until an F-15I Raam Wizzo running ground mapping radar caught the drift. Numbers that should have matched not matching, the depot's radar returned sitting 5 meters west of where GPS claimed. And he ran it again and got the same result and pushed corrected coordinates to every aircraft in the package through a datalink running at capacity, stitching together a targeting solution through smoke and frequency noise from a backseat he couldn't see out of, nobody having planned for this. It working anyway. And then the hardest target came last. The Tehran refinery at Shah Ray, 225,000 barrels per day, cracking towers, and pressurized vessels holding superheated hydrocarbon vapor at 400 degrees Celsius. Miss short and you hit empty ground, miss long and a catalytic cracker ruptures, and the chain reaction stops being a military strike and starts being a catastrophe measured in city blocks. Emerald leads fuel gauge having crossed bingo 4 minutes earlier, meaning one pass, no corrections, the targeting pod showing nothing through accumulated smoke from 3 depot fires. Trusting radar terrain mapping and a GPS correction calculated over a different quadrant of the city and the math connecting them through a data link running at capacity. And he committed 2 weapons, northern storage, southern perimeter, both hitting 120 meters of clearance around the processing core, achieved through GPS drift and smoke, and superheated updrafts that shoved the second bomb 3 meters off its program path during terminal flight. 3 meters being the margin between a fuel tank and whatever stood on the other side of the fence. And the University of Tehran's seismographs registered the secondary detonation not because the weapon was large, but because 60,000 barrels of petroleum igniting simultaneously shakes the earth hard enough to rattle instruments built for earthquakes. And somewhere in the geology department, a graduate student's thesis data got very complicated, while 16 pilots turned west and started doing the math on fuel they didn't have, crossing airspace that had just reminded them, loudly, repeatedly, and in several languages of fire and radar, that degraded and destroyed are very different words.